Don't go to the movie
Probably going
hotel.
to see Gone with the Wind.
Send us
Try and make it look as if this is a difficult issue for us to retreat from.
2017, A Space Odyssey.
Gone with the Wind.
send us some snaps.
Okay, well, I'm not going to read what is a long resolution. It's in your papers there, and it's too much to get up on the screen. But obviously, on page 6 and 7, we have the resolutions there. So we are going to ask for speakers' questions, and we've had no amendments tabled by anyone, or shadowed. So there are no amendments, so we're actually talking about the substantive motion, and we're having questions. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got 3 questions, and they're all about the legal clarification, because from my opinion, I think this is the absolute crux of the matter. So, to your worship, I suppose, it has to be, I'm seeking some legal clarification. Please can you and or our legal team tell me why we, which is council of course, didn't get a declaratory judgment on the decision as to whether the accommodation targeted rate was legally able to be implemented and whether it could be legally passed on to visitors prior to today and before we vote. Why couldn't we get that declaratory judgment?
Dane.
I've provided you with legal advice on this issue in 2 confidential workshops. It's not appropriate that I provide you with further legal advice today in this setting. Having said that, I can briefly answer your question through the chair, which is that that question of the potential pass-on of the increased cost is not suited to a declaratory judgment for a number of reasons. One of which is that declaratory judgments cannot be sought where there are facts in dispute or where there is a mixture of questions of fact and law. If the question posed is whether the increased cost can be passed on or whether it can be passed on by way of a line item or a surcharge, that would be very fact specific, and it would be dependent on how each accommodation provider calculates and advertises the possible surcharge and whether that would be misleading under the legislation. So that could not helpfully be determined in the abstract. I should say, however, that it's quite important that we're clear that even if that was a possibility, it's not council's role to tell accommodation providers to either pass on the rate or advise them on how they do that. That is for them to decide individually and to take their own legal advice as they see appropriate.
Okay, my second question, I suppose, is then to the Mayor, if we're, and I don't want to breach confidence, and I hope I'm not, but you've told me and you've told other councillors that you've had multiple legal opinions as to the confirmation of the legality of the rate and the ability for the accommodation sector to pass this on to visitors. Can you please publicly confirm that that is indeed the case?
I can, and we would not have proceeded with this proposal if we had advice that it was not consistent with the statute under which we operate. The legal advice that I've received is that it's consistent with the Local Government Act, that it is consistent with the Fair Trading Act, and it is consistent with the Commerce Act. The first source of advice was clearly our own very competent internal legal staff, but their view is backed up strongly by Simpson Grierson, who are a reputed law firm, and specifically Anne Callanan, who's a partner and also an expert in competition and consumer law. In terms of the wider issues of the Local Government Act, we've also sought advice and been reassured by David Goddard QC, who is one of the leading QCs in this country.
Okay, my third question, if I may, Mr. Chair, then. Look, if that's the case, this has been nicknamed by some in the media as a pillow tax or a bed tax. Now, it's not, as we know. But if, as you have stated, our legal counsel has stated, it is possible or it's legally able to be passed on if the provider wants to, does this mean for the consumer or the visitor it will appear like a bed tax overseas that shows on a bill, like a separate line? Like I've got a hotel bill here from the Wyndham Hotel and Resorts in Santa Monica, and there is a line item and it says tourism tax.
Yep.
Does that mean it can do that?
The legal advice to us was very clear that business could pass on the targeted rate in exactly the same way as they pass on all other business costs. If they bundle it up as part of the price, there is no issue under the Fair Trading Act. What different hotels can't do is collude with each other to set a price by which they would put it up. The specific question about whether it is regarded as a surcharge, there is case law that I'm aware of, and there is clear rulings from the Commerce Commission that you could pass it on as a surcharge, but you have to be very careful about the way in which you do that. It needs to be clearly disclosed before the customers are committed to getting the accommodation. The reason for the surcharge needs to be clearly and accurately described, and the surcharge can't be used, I shouldn't say dishonestly, can't be used wrongly to recover more than the costs of the targeted rate. It has to be accurate. Provided those things are done, then the advice I have is that the industry can label it as a surcharge, but my advice to the industry is to take their own legal advice on that before proceeding to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Member Benoni.
I had a point. I had a point of order, actually, Mr. Chair.
Oh, okay. Point of order.
Mr. Chair, can I just seek your ruling as to this exchange that we've just had with three people? I came here this morning and I interpret what happened to Councillor Quacks as an attempt at bullying. I've just seen an exchange which, to my way of thinking, effectively waives the very privilege that we sought to obtain yesterday in a workshop. And I wonder about the nature of the information that was received yesterday, because it's effectively just been communicated into debate. And I wonder, Mr. Chair, given you're chairing the meeting, if you'd give a ruling on that.
Well, could I speak to that, Mr. Chairman?
No, not at the moment. No, I'm taking that as being okay, but I hear what you're saying, Councillor Newman. We don't want to sail too close to the wind, and Dana has clearly given us that indication, and we're going to be careful, but I hear what you're saying. I'm taking it as being okay at this stage. And I don't want to really get into the debate about yesterday's confidential meeting involving a member. So
well, speaking to the point of order, Mr. Chairman, I heard from the Mayor's mouth all of that information that was...
Taking this as a point of order as well, is
well,
it?
it is. We had a kangaroo court yesterday with Dick, and now, because it's coming from the Mayor, you are allowing this. And now I am completely confused about what I am able to debate and not debate, because the information that we received largely yesterday is all on the table. So I would appreciate your ruling on this.
You can actually say whatever you want in this meeting, and if it's something that we don't want to be said, that you've been advised by our council legal area that you shouldn't be saying it, we can't stop you from saying it, because you're your own person, it's an open debate, but you want to be careful, I would suggest, about what you do say. I think the Mayor was being careful with his answer. I thought the Mayor was being very careful.
I should speak to that,
And I'm
Mr.
going to
Chairman.
ask him to just speak.
Any comment that I've just made to you is consistent with the legal advice that I have outside of yesterday's committee that I am able to say, and I can assure you that the advice I have given is legitimate. You will also appreciate that when wrong comments are made publicly about a proposal that I'm supporting, that it is illegal and improper, I need to defend the proposal against those wrong charges, and I've done so.
Member Hanani.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair, thank you. In terms of the, I'd like to call it a pillow tax, a bed tax, whatever you want to call it, it's a tax, it's a tax. My concern as a member of IMSB, Independent Māori Statutory Board, is that it is about our folk who work in the industry. And at the end of the day, they don't run the places, apart from a cursory interest in the Tainui Novotel and out at the airport. But they are at the low end of the employment chain. And my concern really is about the affordability. Just because someone looks as though they can afford something, looks can be deceiving. An extra $350,000 a year will go out of the Novotel out at the airport. Now, if somebody can't afford to pay something, something else down the line has to happen. And it usually, it's been my experience in the last 37, 38 years, that it's Māori and Pacific Island and women who get canned for the decisions that are made up the top. And
Member Hanani, sorry, I don't want to cut you, but I'm searching for a question.
No,
there.
it's good.
no, it's not a question.
Oh, well, we are in question time. Can I? Sorry about that.
Mr. Chair, point of order. I've sat here since 9:30 hearing all the so-called elected bloody councillors give their opinion on this, that and the other thing without asking a question.
No, we had questions and then we had comments. So.
And this is the first time that somebody has been interjected on for actually having his or her say.
Do you have a question?
I am wondering before.
Yeah, well,
That's all you need to say.
Okay. For semantics' sake, I am wondering.
Thank you.
What is the meaning of kawhiwhi?
What's the meaning of life?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Is there in the standing orders a differentiation between asking questions or making comments? I don't believe there is, and I think it's inappropriate to restrict people to questions if they want to make a comment.
Absolutely.
Look, if you want to move to a method where we're going to have questions
But you
and
can
then
do it any
comment,
old
we
time.
could do that. But at this stage, we're not going to do that. We started quite
Not at
clearly
a
with
press
this meeting
conference.
that there was questions and then it's comment. And I will be coming back to Member Hanari after the last question so that he can resume speaking.
Oh no, I'm not going to have that. I'm actually going to finish what I say.
Okay, well, go ahead.
Started.
Go ahead, Member.
I've thought very, very hard about this issue because of, before I was rudely interrupted, about Māori workers, Pacific Island workers and women. I've never ever before abstained from voting, but I intend to today. And the reason that I intend to abstain is, and a message to all of you, is don't put this on the IMSB. We are actually not a member of the governing council. And so don't put any approbation on us as members of this committee when the vote is taken. I think we've been shut out of this decision. Māori have been shut out of this decision, and I think I'd like to just let you know that it was me who actually put the issue of Māori seats to my caucus and got told where to go. And then the Independent Māori Statutory Board came about. So I'm totally against this, and if I had any power to sit around the governing council, I would vote against it. But at the end of the day, it's the governing council's decision. It's not the IMSB's decision, and you make decisions how you wish. I have been lobbied, like Councillor Quacks.
Bullied.
Lobbied.
Lobbied, okay.
Yeah, it's not bullied because I knew the two fellows that came to see me, and I think they'd think again about bullying me. I appreciated being contacted by these two organisations to give me a rundown on where they stood. So that's what I'm wondering about this morning, Mr. Chair. I don't know how my brother next to me will vote, and that's up to him. But I do put it to you that Māori workers in the industry have been left out of the decision. I mean, what was the consultation with some of the unions about how this affects workers? I can't see anything in the report that says a consultation was undertaken with those that supposedly represent Māori people. We weren't consulted about it, other than having to try and make up our own minds or discussions with individual members of the IMSB. So I've said what I've come to say, and thank you for your allowing me to finish.
That was a good question.
Thank you, Charles. I just need to reply with one thing. There is, I must admit, we had workshops where members of the Independent Māori Statutory Board were asked to come, and I did actually talk to the chair and the deputy chair as to why we weren't seeing anyone at those workshops. So that has been passed on, and I hear what you say. I know you're talking about the governing body, but that was passed on and followed up. I just really
would like more than 1 day's notice.
I just really think people need to be very careful what they're saying in relation to a member that had some advice, personal advice to him purely on his own, his advice, and it all stems from a confidential meeting. So I really think it's inappropriate to be talking about bullying. But that's up to how you guys want to do it, but I'm just emphasising it was a confidential workshop yesterday, and therefore we shouldn't be talking about it. That's what the issue is, so I'm just passing it on. We have Councillor Watson and Councillor Wayne Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a specific question as it goes to the section on remission of rates and the notion that Council, I think the exact wording, will consider applications for remission of the rate. We've got the example of the strata title that's used. I'm just wondering, Andrew, that seems to imply an application that could be made under any type of circumstances, miscellaneous, so not just in particular pertaining to the targeted rate for the hotels and motels. Would that enable people then who have forward bookings to do just the same? So a number of these hotels have sometimes 2-3 years of forward bookings. I'm assuming they would get captured under that same ability to apply for a remission. Is that correct?
So the proposal resolution. The resolution.
5.
B, yep.
Yeah, 5. Roman 5.
So the rates remission, miscellaneous purposes rates remission scheme under the rates remission and postponement policy provides 3 categories that remissions can be applied for under. It's rather rarely used to ensure that the rates are applied in a pretty universal manner, fair to everyone. the third part of that scheme does provide room for something like this to be considered in that space. The council would then have on receipt of applications for the remission, it would have the ability to determine whether or not a remission was appropriate, and a key part of that will be looking at the contractual arrangements that the ratepayer was subject to, and staff will obviously be guided by any decisions or advice from this meeting on how that was to be implemented. Certainly, it could apply to someone holding a strata title. It could apply to forward contracts. Okay. All right, thanks.
Finished, John? That was... Yep.
Yeah,
Your
fine.
question,
Yeah, that's
okay.
fine, thanks.
Councillor Walker, Wayne Walker.
Sure. I've got a few questions. The first question I've got is just around who would be the most appropriate entity to impose this kind of rate or this kind of tax. Quite obviously, we know that the council has various tools, and the tool that we're using is a tool based on capital. But would not the government be a more appropriate entity to have, if we call it a bed tax across the sector at large?
Sales taxes and property taxes each have their own advantages and disadvantages. The council is the only entity that can do this kind of property tax at the moment. The government's the only entity that can do a bed tax at the moment. So, a bit difficult to make a judgment on what's appropriate for the council in those circumstances.
No,
And
the answer is fine.
My follow-on question then is, if the government were to introduce a bed tax, what would happen to this targeted rate?
That will be if this targeted rate was adopted, a decision on what the council should do. If the government were to introduce a bed tax, will be a decision that you would have to make as the governing body in terms of what you were to do with your rate in those circumstances.
Okay. The other question I've got just goes to the information that we've been provided with. I got the list yesterday of all of the hotels and motels that are being captured by this targeted rate. Having said that, the information I also sought was the number of and the identity of those hotels and motels that were going to be getting some form of remission. I asked to be able to add up the number to arrive at the rate that we're proposing to strike, because the Mayor mentioned something of the order of 13-odd million. Having said that, the quantity that I've got arrives at 15-odd million. So I have to make the assumption that there are a number of properties here that aren't going to be rated. They may be strata title, there may be a number of categories. I'd just like to know what properties they are. And I did ask for that.
So the rates, what we've calculated there, calculates to deliver around 13.4 million under the Mayor's proposal, but a GST in there undoubtedly. That will also affect the adding up. As far as who would get the remission, that would very much depend on the circumstances and how it was decided to apply and offer a remission. So we could only calculate that after applications for remissions had been received. So it would be a chunk of money. There are quite a number of service departments in Auckland that are operated in a hotel style. However, they've all got quite different numbers of... The nature of the agreements they have are quite different. It will be a proportion of the money, but not a huge proportion.
Okay, my other question is just around this targeted rate generally. Is this a fairly new type of rate that the council's applying? Have we applied a rate of this type before that is so difficult to pass on, given that we're applying the rate to a property owner, but it's actually the operator that will be passing the rate on? So it's quite a different type of targeted rate to what we've ever done before, is it not? Is this pretty innovative?
So all the property rates will get paid by different parties depending on the contractual arrangements they have with the parties they lease their properties to. So, I mean, obviously it doesn't apply to residential, but if I own a business on Dominion Road, then I may well find that the landlord pays my rates, or my tenancy agreement may require me to pay the rates. So there's quite a number of different arrangements of that nature. It just depends on the tenant and the landlord.
Okay. Did we signal that we were contemplating a rate like this in the current long-term plan? I don't mean the next long-term plan, I mean this long-term plan.
No.
Okay, thank you very much. And just in terms of best match, do you think that capital value is the best match for a tax, if we call it that, on people staying in a hotel or motel? Let's take the worst case scenario where we've got a hotel or motel that doesn't attract many people, but would still be captured by this rate. How's that going to work for them?
Judgments based on making a judgment around the best form of taxation to apply is a matter that we've provided you with some information with to make a call on today, and that's the resolution that you'll be looking at.
Other question I've got just picks up on the question that Councillor Watson raised around the ability to pass on. We've had a submission from one of the hotel operators, Rydges, that up to 60% of their beds have got forward contracts, some of them going out for a number of years. In a situation where that's a legitimate concern and they can prove it, would you anticipate that we would be giving them a remission on that number of beds over time as a proportion of the rate on the capital value that they'd be charged?
That's something that you could certainly consider. You'll also note that in the submissions, the Tourism Industry Association of Aotearoa noted that they'd done a survey of a number of hotels. I think they had 35% of revenue booked ahead for 12 months, or for 2017, and 18% for 2018. So obviously those providers are in a different, not all providers are in exactly the same situation in regards to their forward agreements.
And the other question I've got just goes to competition within the marketplace. How does an operator get on when you might have two hotels side by side, one strata title, significantly not paying the accommodation targeted rate, the other one paying the accommodation targeted rate, and how do they get on, or how does the one that's paying the rate get on in terms of hardship? If in a competitive environment and somebody's going to Trivago and they buy on the basis of price,
let's
and
get the question
and the like, and they're losing money as a consequence of that.
Competition's a terrible thing, but that's the way it is.
I suppose how each individual property would respond to the increase in their costs, remembering that it'd be pretty rare that you'd have two identical properties next to each other anyway. They're already going to have some differences in their costs and some differences in the product they'll be offering to their customers. So if one property raised its price, the other property would have to decide whether it wanted to keep its price where it was to get more customers, or to raise its price and just make a little bit more profit. It's possible that with a product that's relatively price inelastic and with very strong demand and high occupancy, that the better strategy might be just to raise your price as well.
And the other question I've got just
Councillor
goes-
Walker, there are other people wanting questions, so last question, please. Because that's a lot of questions.
Okay, well, this is a pretty important matter.
Yep.
It
Next
could
question.
put some operators out of business.
Next
So
question.
it's pretty important. As far as geography is concerned, how was the geography arrived at? For example, have you checked out the impact on operators, say up at Whangaproa, who might not benefit at all from the expenditure of ATID in terms of this targeted rate?
So the report you have notes some of the observations that the submitters made about the possibility that providers may benefit differently depending on where they are located within the region, to assist you to make a judgment about whether or not you may wish to, if you're putting the rate in place, to strike that on a geographically differentiated basis. And indeed, that's the proposal the Mayor's put in front of you to consider, so that you can make that judgment.
So just following on then, if an operator can show through hardship that they're not getting any benefit from this expenditure by ATID and it's hurting them, could they then get a remission?
The remission proposal relates to contractual limitations, so unless an additional remission was placed in relation to hardship, they wouldn't be eligible.